Hi, I'm Gerald Finken. I'm CEO of E2, and this is another session in my webinar series about E2 dispensing. Again, this wonderful new way we're going to do clinical supplies that's patient-centric, better quality, less cost. It's a wonderful thing. And of course, it's brought to you by E2, where we're bringing the practice of pharmacy into clinical research. And of course, what better way to bring practice pharmacy into clinical research than to look at dispensing? So in the sequence of events I've gone through, of the webinars, today I'm going to talk about counseling. And it's one of the key elements that's often overlooked in clinical trials that we're going to look a little bit more into today. So the questions, like when I think about this, is for counseling, is like the question, like the who, what, where, when, and why, and how. And we're going to cover quite a few of those. And as we go through those, and you think each aspect, like as we discuss each point, it really is all about quality. I'm going to summarize that again at the end. This is done for the idea of being patient-centric, patient engagement, and to improve quality of the way clinical trials are run. And so I can tell you from experience that we created the clinical trials research pharmacy concept, where 20 years ago we had pharmacists counseling patients in clinical trials. We learned so much about the impact pharmacists have on medication counseling and even study counseling. We're not going to go into what I call E2 counseling today. Today we're going to just focus on the medication counseling. So into my flip charts, which you know I really enjoy, as I try to teach everyone about this wonderful new method called E2 dispensing. So why are we doing E2 dispensing, right? And I should say E2 counseling for E2 dispensing. Well, you can say the counseling makes sense. It's like, well, why? You know, it's required. Well, like, is it? And it's patient-centric. It's, you know, we all have gotten prescriptions and we like to be told about that medication. Well, did you know in 1990, Omnibus Budget Reduction Act was enacted? And that was a federal law that required, right, federal law required to improve, patients be counseled, right, to improve medication understanding by Medicaid beneficiaries. So those who have Medicaid, they're saying, no, pharmacists, you must counsel those patients. So of course you can't counsel Medicaid and not others. So in essence, all states adopted said it's required. Pharmacists must require patients who get their medications dispensed to them. Now that's a law. Did you know that? So when you go into the pharmacy and you walk up the pharmacy and they put something in front of you, it's like, you don't want to be counseled, do you? That's really not quite the way the practice of pharmacy is supposed to be. For me, every time I get a prescription, new or refill, I insist upon seeing the pharmacist because that's critical to my success as a patient taking medication. This is really a really good thing. But I'll talk about later one of the issues. I think it's on the next one. And so I won't get ahead of myself. Who does it? Well, again, the Omnibus Budget Reduction Act was for pharmacists, right? The medication expert who dispenses the medication by law, then to have to counsel the patients by law. So it's pharmacists. The big issue that was enacted back then was, or that was brought up, but the practice pharmacy embraced it anyhow, was pharmacists weren't reimbursed for this cognitive aspect of their profession. And that was a big setback in my mind because that moved most of the profession to this instead of this. Again, what we get paid for. Of course, you know, who could be other licensed healthcare providers. Like when you get discharged from a hospital, many times a nurse practitioner, a nurse, doctors, and pharmacists all can do like medication counseling at discharge, but usually at the guidance and the overview purview of the pharmacist in the hospital. So what about clinical drugs? Well, based upon the definition of drug in all states, clinical supplies fall under the same aspect. Dispensing must be done by a pharmacist. Counseling must be done by a pharmacist. What I can say to you is, you know, how this is done, the best thing is, of course, to get it done. Who it should not be is a GMP personnel representative, someone who's trained in good manufacturing practices, shouldn't be talking to patients or even healthcare providers. It shouldn't be a courier. The courier shouldn't be talking to the patient about their health care or any aspect of the drug delivery, because they shouldn't even know they're delivering medications. And of course, non-licensed individuals, even at the clinical sites. If I'm a biologist and I happen to get promoted to a position, I'm not licensed. And so like the question I ask is, would you like to be, like if you're in a clinical trial or in even your medication, do you want to be counseled by me? I seem like an educated, pretty smart guy. Or do you want to be counseled by Joe Delivery? Or do you want to be counseled by, pharmacist Jerry, who's licensed to provide that service and has the experience to provide that service? So how? So how is it done? We know there's several ways, and of course this is pretty straightforward. Most all the time it's in person. It should be at the time you receive your medication, really in the clinic and in the pharmacy. That's best, because then you're one-on-one, you can read my facial expressions, you can hear it in my voice, all those aspects, and we all know person to person. Now, with COVID and where we've gone, the telehealth and DCTs, that's changed some, and it's really come up to speed where a lot of telehealth now can take place, as can counseling, because you can see and hear what the patient is saying. And most of the time, what's really nice is some of the privacy, and I'll get to that in a minute. The other thing is to remember is that like telepharmacy is the same thing, where pharmacists been counseling patients. Again, back in 1990, North Dakota put into law telepharmacy services that pharmacists in a major city could dispense and counsel patients, 50 to 100 miles away in rural communities. So there was this rural DCT pharmacy role that we've been playing again since the 1990s. So this is really, when I think about telehealth, telepharmacy, it's nothing new to the practice of pharmacy about how we ensure that patients are getting the services they need. And I question through all of this is, where we need to go, where I want to go with E2 Dispensing, is that this should be your personal pharmacist, the person you know and trust, and not necessarily a telehealth or telepharmacist that you maybe not have met before. It works like our CTRP services, but we did a lot to develop that trust relationship, because it's really in this trusting relationship and the one-on-one nature of it, the pharmacist knowing their patients and the patient knowing their pharmacist, which is really critical about how this is done. When do we do it? Of course, at the time of dispensing. We talked about that. The time of discharge, I've mentioned that. And of course, now with some of the direct-to-patient, the time of receipt. So when the patient gets their medication, wherever that may be, in the clinic, it could be at their home, it could be at a vacation home, and it could also be a caregiver, right? That the caregiver receives that. And we all know that about the dispensing. The important thing is, in my mind, is when there's limited distractions. How many times do you walk even at a pharmacy and you come up to the window and you're rushed? Now I can say in most independent community stores, that's not quite the case. And almost all of them have counseling rooms. And a lot of them run to MedSync programs, MTM programs, so that you get your one-on-one, non-distracted time with your pharmacist to discuss medications. And for clinical supplies, clinical drugs, it's even greater because you don't know the efficacy, you don't know safety, and those things. It's most important that the patient has undistracted or non-distracted time with their healthcare provider to understand the importance of that medication they're taking, and of course to be counseled on all aspects of that drug they're on. So what do we do during counseling? And this is, I think, pretty standard, most of us know. But I want to point out that every patient is different. Again, when we did our CTRP counseling services, every patient is different. Every patient understands things differently. And of course, those nuances are why you need the pharmacist, the study medication expert, who can hear certain things, what the patient says, and understand that maybe what they said isn't what is meant. And so you can, I'll give you a couple examples in just a minute. So of course, some of the things, how to take the medication, when to take the medication, the side effects, concerns the patient may have, drug-drug interactions that the pharmacist may have recognized, storage, etc. But in proper counseling, it isn't say, you say, Gerald, take this twice a day. Most of the time, good counseling goes with open-ended questions. So, Gerald, how did the doctor tell you how to take this? Or better yet, so tell me, what did the doctor say about this medication? So that the first thing that comes to mind is what's important to me. I'm not funneling the question into the specific, like taking the drug, so I dismiss the fact what really concerns me is when I'm going to take this. And that is like not how, like by mouth. It's like, wait a minute, I work, a night shift, and I'm not sure when I can get that done. So when you leave it open, that allows the patient really to come with the top of their mind about what's important. So I think it's critical, again, to have that success, that the pharmacist who has, thousands of patients of experience of thousands of patients to understand that. And in one case I always use, it's like, if you're not trained as a healthcare provider and you come in and I'm a patient and they say, hey, Gerald, how you doing? I go, okay. Now you check the box, they're okay. No, did you hear my inflection? Okay. You, as a pharmacist, I say, so Gerald, what do you mean by okay? And then you're going to get the real story. Well, I haven't been able to afford my medication in 2 weeks. And that's the type of information as pharmacists we're tuned into and is important to understand. Why pharmacists counsel. So just to really sum this up, the key result of pharmacists counseling patients, which again, the pharmacist being the drug expert who has the most expertise in counseling, is to greatly improve quality of the whole clinical trial program. This idea of I can't tell you the number of times that patients, in our counseling by pharmacists talk about, what they thought they heard wasn't what it was supposed to be. And even we go back to the timing, they could get dispensed medication, counseled in the clinic after being there 8 hours. By the time they got home, they forgot everything. So when our pharmacists would do follow-up calls, we would greatly improve the quality of the program by reiterating how they're supposed to take it, when they're supposed to take it, et cetera. And the most important thing about all this is the counseling is patient engagement, right? You hear firsthand from the patient what they want instead of like instructing them about how it's supposed to be done, and to hear what they want to provide and information back and forth. Because it really is a two-way communication with counseling for E2 dispensing. And with that, I hope it gave you some key insights about the counseling aspect. And next week, we're going to get into a very specific topic that I think is critical for E2 dispensing. That is how we use comparators, or how we can potentially use comparators moving forward in clinical trials. Thank you very much.